What's up guys, we're here with a guide for Arena Season 5, which I'm dubbing the Season of Risk and Ruin. The name calls out the risks you'll see a lot of players take by choosing a high damage build that comes at the cost of increased vulnerability, and the Ruin bit calls out additional trap card strategies you'll see players deploy, especially as the season progresses. This guide will get into cards we'll have right away and those announced for later this season. Let's get into it. This is a snapshot they gave us of the cards we'll be starting off with this season. We'll start by covering the new cards and then get into the returning cards as well as any changes coming to them this season. We'll also touch on the cards that'll be coming later this season, then wrap up with a few card combination examples to get you started. Panacea and Ninjutsu Potion should look familiar from the events we've had in the past. Panacea gives you a small recovery of your health, ninjutsu energy, and weapon cooldown. This is a weaker card and I generally recommend using something else instead. Ninjutsu Potion recovers a little less than a third of your ninjutsu before you level it up and can be a good card to help you take down bosses faster. The other two cards, Blood Sacrifice and Bloody Blade, are brand new. So Blood Sacrifice gives you an attack boost at the cost of your health over time. This card can open you up to risks against your opponent's trap cards, but can be paired with Blood Contract to get an extra damage boost, and will likely become a staple card for a lot of players in the same way that you may have seen Mutual Destruction and Blood Contract used together. Bloody Blade gives you an increased attack and increased HP for collecting goldfish coins at the cost of taking increased damage. This card can be a good option for players that like using King's Blessing or are able to clear stages without taking damage. Similar to Blood Sacrifice, this one does open you up to trap cards being used, so, be cautious when you're using it. Strength gives you a direct attack boost across the board. It's an okay card. Depending on your setup, I generally recommend going for Advanced Strength or Elemental Mastery instead. Strong is often viewed as a throwaway card. If you're playing with a Chaos Battlefield effect, I recommend using this card in one of your first two slots to reduce the advantage you give to your opponent. Bounty might seem really useful at a glance, but usually holds players back from having more options during their match. Once you start playing hard maps or above, I recommend not using this card and finding a different way to collect fish for the second gate. Any of the Elemental Mastery cards are good options if you're using a ninja or weapon of the same element. These cards are especially helpful when their element comes up as a weakness for the battlefield effect. Ice Protection can be useful as a defensive card, but is better if found while navigating through the stage rather than buying it before a boss. Substitution Scroll is a good option if you have concerns about surviving and believe there's a good chance of losing all your health. Lightning Shield can be used in a couple of ways. It's a good defensive option, granting you invincibility when navigating tricky portions of a map or boss, as well as defending against trap cards. If you practice timing its use, you can also use it to guarantee fish or ninjutsu generation. It also deals some damage to bosses. Seal is a good card for stopping big damage generated from your opponent's ninjutsu use. Two things to watch out for when using it. First, if you use it against an opponent that hasn't used their ninjutsu, you may help them with the energy recovery mechanic built into the seal. Second, this is not recommended for use against DFK when he has an active ninjutsu in use, because it'll simply cause him to go into the final phase of the attack, which is where most of his damage is. Blind does just what it sounds like, and is a good offensive trap card against opponents when they're fighting bosses or are navigating a difficult portion of a stage. Sharp Sword can be a very useful card for players that rely heavily on their weapon use for their strategy. The weapon damage reduction might feel like something to be concerned about, but the cooldown is something that helps to offset that feeling. This card is generally recommended for higher difficulty maps, such as Nightmare or Unrivaled, or when Confined Battlefield effect is in play. Firebolt can be useful in the right situations. It can be used to defend against some trap cards like Shuriken or Bats, or it can be used offensively against bosses, especially when the Fire Weakness Battlefield effect is in play. Advanced Strength is a decent option to bring along. If you have a ninja equipped with weapons of the same element, choosing the elemental mastery that matches that element is generally a better choice. This card does not stack with Strength. This card is a good choice when you have concerns around health generation for your team, especially when Recovery Forbidden Battlefield effect is active. Make sure you coordinate with your teammates if you're going to use this card. This card works just like the other Substitution Scroll card, but applies it to all of your team. Make sure you coordinate with your team if you're going to use this card. This card is good for boosting your team's attack and HP as long as they survive. It also stacks nicely with other buffs. This card is good for taking out opponents with low health. It's a bit of a guessing game when you're navigating a map, but you can see where their health is when they're fighting a boss. Try to be careful if they're fighting a boss and they are using their ninjutsu. It'll completely negate the effect of this card because they'll take out the bamboo. But it works if they've finished their attack and you know they're low health. This card is also good for taking out opponents with low health, but it attacks the opposing team at random, so it can end up not being helpful if it attacks the wrong person. This card is good for boosting your attack, but should be saved as the last card you purchase to ensure you can afford any other cards you selected. Lurk is a bit quirky. You get a small boost in your attack in exchange for a small risk to having your cards target yourself instead of your opponent while it's active. I generally don't recommend bringing it along, but it's useful if you find it while playing. Disarm is good for delaying your opponent's weapon attack. It can be tricky to time, so keep in mind if you use it right away at the beginning of a fight, for example, you could run into a situation where they use their ninjutsu to kind of buy themselves some time and then they use their weapon attack after it expires. The cost of power is a good alternative to Whetstone if it's forbidden on Nightmare or Unrivaled maps. It's not quite as good and does have a downside as compared to Whetstone in that you can't dash or flip down for a period of time after you use it. If you do bring it along with Whetstone, I recommend using it either before your ninjutsu to help you get defensive cover or after using Whetstone and while the boss is at low health so that you don't have to worry so much about having to figure out how to dodge without flipping. Weaken is effective at slowing down your opponent's damage, especially if they try to do a lot of damage while it's active. One of the main things about it is, if they see that it's active, they might choose not to attack and wait it out, or they may stop using all of their cards or attacks to help kind of delay the effects and let them get their damage ramped back up afterward. Curse Shield is a good option to help the opponent completely stop doing damage. There's a couple of different ways you can use it. The first is if you find yourself behind on the second boss, for example. Maybe the opponent got to the boss before you can use Curse Shield to stop them and give you a chance to work on catching up. The other thing that you can do is you can just completely stop attacking, and if you think they're gearing up to do big damage or if they're using their ninjutsu, you can use it to completely stop all their damage. It doesn't work against Bloody Bet, so you want to make sure that you're aware of that. But it's a great option for you, especially effective against Dragon Flame Kuro, where Seal would automatically send the attack across. This would keep him from doing any damage at all and can be used to help kind of delay or completely nullify his damage. Battle Drum is a great card for when you're wanting to boost your entire team's attack and you're all getting ready to gear up to do as much damage as you can all at the same time. You do need to have some good synergy and coordination with your team to make sure you're getting there and doing your attacks at about the same time so that you don't end up nullifying the effect for one or two of the other teammates. Devotion is a good card that is probably what I would consider second place to Battle Drum. It stacks well with the card, and you also get the added advantage of getting a weapon skill after it expires if you haven't taken any damage. So great to bring along and a good second choice if Battle Drum is banned for some reason. Blood Contract is a good card for players that tend to run low on health or use cards that reduce their health while they're fighting bosses. The card has been updated to now max out damage when you're below 50% health. Crazy Experiment converts your unused cards to be different cards, so I would be careful in using this card. It can be really good if you end up with cards that you don't want to use. Say you pick some up while you're navigating in a map, but if you have cards that you want to use, I would stay away from using it. Whetstone is a great card for those that use the Blade Master passive. I recommend bringing it along. It's considered a staple card for them. For other players, it's also really good for utility, so I wouldn't discount it even if you're not using the Blade Master passive. Outtro players tend to use it with Feather of Wind, helps them get that increase in damage from the weapon, especially if it's above limit break 3, so this one's good to keep in your toolkit. Rapid Conversion is another card that you want to keep in your back pocket and save for the end, so when you're at the second boss, it should be the last card that you purchase. I wouldn't recommend buying it before that because you might not be able to afford other cards that you want. Keep in mind that the cooldown benefit has been reduced from what was happening last season, so what you're seeing here on screen, the benefit's now lower. Spirit Shield is an okay card. I generally don't recommend bringing it along to purchase. If you find it while you're playing on a map, you can use it defensively, but it's generally not one that I would pick while you're selecting your cards before playing a map. The cost of energy is very similar to the cost of power in its downside effects, but instead of reducing your weapon cooldown, it increases your ninjutsu attack, so you use it right before you do your ninjutsu, and you're just kind of off to the races. You want to be very careful if you have issues with dodging or there's some unblockable projectiles coming your way. You will have some issues potentially dodging, so you want to be careful with that. Element Burst does just what it says. It does a boost for your elemental spirits damage. Keep in mind you have to have one to use, so if you don't have the Summon Spirit passive or Forbidden Scroll, I don't recommend bringing this card with you. Emergency Recovery is similar to the Regeneration card in that you can use it if you're having challenges with keeping your health up or if you're taking damage. The main difference here is that you use it once and it gives you an immediate health recovery instead of a regeneration over time. Charm Shield is similar to Curse Shield in that it blocks damage, with the main difference being that 1, it doesn't affect you, and 2, if the opponent manages to break it, then the boss will take damage for the entire value of the damage done to the shield. So it's good to use to block like a single weapon use, or if you're blocking shurikens, not good for blocking ninjutsu attacks. Some weapon attacks will still break it, so you gotta keep that in mind, so you might want to pair with Weaken. But it is a good way to kind of stall or delay the attacks that your opponent's doing. Reversal is an interesting card because it has 2 uses. The first is if you have just used your ninjutsu and you have full health, after you're done, you can go ahead and use this card, and then you'll flip the values of your ninjutsu and HP after losing 30%, and you'll end up being close to ready to using your ninjutsu again. That does come at the cost of your HP, so it'll drop it down. So if you're in a recovery forbidden situation, it can put you at risk for losing if you take any damage. The other way that you can use it is if you have low HP but a full ninjutsu or close to full ninjutsu and you need to recover health, you can go ahead and use it the same way that you would in the other scenario, except in this case you'll boost your HP. This card's similar to the Spirit Shield, except you get up to 6 uses, so you get 1 instance of damage that you block at the cost of reducing a little bit of ninjutsu energy. So it is useful. It's a good defensive card that you can bring along. Just keep in mind that when you're going to use it, that you're going to lose a little ninjutsu. So if you're close to getting ready to do your big attack and then you use this, then you're going to have to wait a little bit longer to build it back up. Summoning Horn has a few good uses. You can use it to defend against trap cards if your opponent ends up just unloading 3 or 4 trap cards on you and you don't have a good defense option other than this. This is a good way to kind of get out of harm's way, not take any damage, and you're good to go. The other thing you can do is if you're navigating a tricky part of a stage and you're worried about dying, or if you're going to pit soon, or you just know you have issues with making that jump, you can use the Summoning Horn to help you get through that section. And then the last thing you can do is if you're in an area of a map where there's a lot of fish that you know you can get, you can use the Summoning Horn to get it. Last Resort is a high risk, high reward card, so it gives you a really good boost to your ninjutsu, but pretty much turns any damage that you take into a one-shot kill. Shuriken Storm is a good card for attacking, but targets your slowest opponent, so you gotta be careful when you're using it. Might not target the player you want to hit if you're in the middle of a boss fight and you see someone has low damage, it might not hit them. Card Forbidden is a good card to use when you're trying to prevent your opponent from stopping you from doing something, or if you want to stop them from using their cards to use for buffs, or if they're using Whetstone or something like that. Gravity Field is good for 2 different things. It's good when you're wanting to affect an opponent that's in an area that's hard to jump through, so you know they'll tend to use triple jump or float. And it's also good against players that bring Bloody Bet and reducing their health, so if they're low on health, it can take them down to 0 pretty easily. Energy Devotion is a good team card, but requires some solid team synergy, so you need to make sure that your team has used their ninjutsu first, and then once it's cleared, then you can go ahead and use this card. If you time it too early, you can end up just wasting the card and not actually benefiting your teammates. If you're expecting your opponent to use trap cards, Eye for Eye is a good option to bring with you so that you can get the effect that they try to inflict on you cast back on them. Now there is a caveat. If they use something like Curse Shield, for example, it doesn't really do anything to them because they're already self-inflicted for that one, and it just ends up wasting your card. Taunt is a nice card to bring along if you want to give your teammates some cover against some of the randomly targeted cards. So Seal, Curse Shield, Disarm, those single use instances for those cards, they can target you instead of your teammates, and then that gives them what they need to be able to take whatever actions they're working through. This one works just like the other lightning shield I covered. Just make sure you coordinate with your team before you use it, since it applies to all of your teammates and not just yourself. Ice Crystal is a good option to help take the boss down, gives it to all of your teammates, so once you know your full team is at the boss, you go ahead and use the card and everybody gets to do a little bit of extra damage. Really useful when there is a water weakness battle effect. Fury is a good card, with the only downside being that once you take damage it goes away. So if you're getting ready to do a big attack, whether it's just your ninjutsu or using several weapon and card attacks, you can use this right beforehand and this will help you boost your damage. This weakened card works just like the other weakened card, except it affects all your opponents. Make sure you coordinate with your team. You don't want to have conflicting debuffs that end up competing against each other. Purify clears all the statuses on yourself. Be careful when you're using this. It doesn't just clear debuffs, it also clears any buffs that you might have had. Armor Up is a good option for opponents that are using their ninjutsu or if they have low health and you want to have the boss attack do more damage and also have their projectiles be indestructible. Pot of Greed is a good way to get a quick boost to your attack. It also pairs well with Blood Contract to help boost your damage by reducing your health. Be careful when you're using it. It can take you down to 0 health and kill you. Mutual Destruction does big damage to the boss, but brings you down to 1 HP. This is a good card that pairs with Blood Contract. It's also a good relay card option if you want to, take your health down quickly. You use it, take some quick damage, and then go ahead and relay to your other ninja. Lava Rain is a nice trap card because you can't clear it using attacks, and it's a little harder to dodge than some of the other ones. So I recommend bringing this one along if you're on a Recovery Forbidden battlefield effect, or if you have a few other trap cards that are in play at the same time. Lantern Trap is a good card to use when you're dealing with either low health opponents, or if you know they're going to use attacks to clear it and you want to reduce the number of fish they have. Wind Dash has a few different uses. The first is to just simply catch up or get a lead on your opponents when you're racing towards the boss. The other thing you can do is you can pair it with weapons to go ahead and deal with some extra damage. You can also use it to run past or through obstacles that you might have some challenge with getting through. Weak Point is a useful card if your opponent's low health, or if you're trying to help them get down to 0 health on Recovery Forbidden. It's also good to use right before you use a trap card to deal damage to your opponents. Weapon Scroll is an okay card. It's a bit of a gamble. You might get an attack you want to use, you might not. I generally recommend using Whetstone over this one, and I don't recommend bringing this one along. Energy Dissipation basically reduces your opponent's ninjutsu energy continuously over a few seconds. It's a good option if you're worried about them going to the boss and just kind of blitzing them. It can be overcome by either using a ninjutsu potion or reversal, but generally a good choice to help slow down your opponent. Forbidden Scroll can be a nice alternative to Whetstone or Cost of Power, since a Disarm doesn't prevent you from using it. Poison Shuriken is a good card to use, especially against opponents that are using their ninjutsu like Mai or Itsuru. Even Breaking Thunder Riki, for when they go off screen, those shurikens automatically come to them, and it means that they're going to be losing some HP. This is also good on maps like Forbidden Recovery, or if you know they're going to take increased damage over a period of time, then this can help get them down to 0. Dark Field works just like Blind, but for all opponents. This Disarm card works just like the other one, except it works on all opponents. Just make sure you coordinate with your team before you use it so that you're not conflicting with your card use. Dispel works similar to Purify, except you use it on your opponent instead of yourself. Just make sure you're paying attention to whether or not they have debuffs in play. If they do, you might want to wait to use it. Kind of balance it against what you're kind of seeing going on and what you're expecting to have happen between their buffs and debuffs. For Symbol Seal, works just like the individual seal card, except it works on all opponents. Like a lot of other cards, just make sure you coordinate with your team before you use it. Curse Shield All is the same as Curse Shield, just against all your opponents, just like the other cards I've been pointing out, like this one. Make sure you coordinate with your team. This Charm Shield is just like the individual use. Again, you've heard me say it a few times already now. Make sure you coordinate with your team since it's against all opponents. This one actually is really good to use with Weaken All, so that you can reduce the amount of damage that they're doing and reduce their chances of actually breaking the shield. King's Blessing gives you a damage boost over time, where if you take any damage, you end up losing the full boost that you received and you have to build it back up all over again. This is good for players who can do no damage runs or take little to no damage as they're going through the stages so that they can do the most damage when they get to the bosses. This card can be tricky to use, especially if trapped cards are in play. Immortal is a popular card for players that are having difficulty surviving on stages or on Forbidden Recovery, so if you think you're going to have an issue with making it to the boss or to the end of a stage, I would recommend bringing this card along. Bloody Bet is a bit of a double-edged sword. It prevents you from taking damage or getting status effects on you at the cost of taking some hits to your health every time somebody uses a card against you. So it can be tricky to use. It can end up taking out your first ninja. If you're on a solo map, for example, then you can end up losing automatically if you have Bloody Bet and you have a bunch of cards used against you. The other thing to keep in mind is that if you die and you relay, then your other ninja won't have this in effect, so any statuses, traps, anything like that get used against you will end up working. United Effort is a support card that ends up boosting the attack of your teammates up to 15%. So the way this works is you use either a buff card like Devotion or Battle Drum, or you use an attack card like Lightning Shield All or Ice Crystal All. Any of these cards that end up benefiting all of your teammates end up giving them a boost. The boost does not apply to you, so this purely is you playing support when you're using this. It is something that can be helpful when you're dealing with team attacks and you're playing a support role. So if you're going to use Energy Devotion, for example, that can be a way for you to go ahead and support your team. You get the United Effort benefit and they can continue dealing attacks and damage while you're focused on just making sure they have the support they need. Ice Core is generally considered more of a defensive passive card, but can be used defensively on bosses if you drop your health when you get to them. So this is one that you could benefit by using, for example, Blood Contract to help boost the damage that you're dealing when you drop below 50% health. Card Blessing is a good card to bring along if you have trouble getting enough fish to buy other cards, so you can keep things pretty cheap and then you can ensure that you have 3 cards that you're going to get. Keep in mind that you don't inherit on relay, so if you die before you get your 3rd card, you're not going to get any additional cards that you might have been missing. So the cards are random, you can't pre-select them, so it could end up giving you cards that you don't want to use. Blade Master gives you the benefit of cooling down your second weapon when you use your primary, and then boosting your weapon attack damage when you use your sub-weapon. This one pairs really well with Whetstone, Cost of Power, Rapid Conversion, and Sharp Sword. Summon Spirit is a good alternative for players that have concerns around being disarmed when they're using Blade Master, so you can use your weapon, and then on your 1st, 3rd, or 5th use, you end up getting a Summon Spirit card, and then you can use it for the element that corresponds to your primary weapon. Arcana gives you a little bit of a boost to your ninjutsu damage. Some cards that you would want to bring along for this would be the Cost of Energy, Ninjutsu Potion, or Reversal. Also keep in mind that your charging rate is reduced, so you may want to consider bringing a Master Mystique for your relic. Element is a pretty interesting card. It basically converts some of your shurikens into element orbs. There's a chance of it occurring every time one appears. And this is useful for either Confined or Overdrive. I like it a lot on Overdrive because you don't get as many uses for your primary and secondary weapon. The cooldowns increase, so this gives you a chance to get a little bit of boosted damage while you're waiting for your weapon cooldown to occur. This can be useful on other maps as well, but those are the 2 main scenarios where I tend to see it used most. Meditate looks like an interesting passive card that'll be coming up in the future here. it says gain a card immunity every 65 seconds with a cap of 2 cards. So I think the shortened time here for 4.5 seconds starting out is going to be a pretty small window. So it could either work really well, or it could just be one of those things that sounds good, but the utility ends up being really low. So we'll see. This will be interesting to see. I think it'll be a counter that some people pick for 3v3 and trying to, delay attacks that happen on them. Trap Expert looks like a more useful version of Card Blessing, so I'm looking forward to seeing this one come up. This will be pretty good and probably will become a staple for those players that like using trap cards against their opponents, especially when they see, they did big damage to a boss and now they want to use traps to go ahead and see if they can kill the opponent. Boost, I think, will be interesting. I don't think it's going to get a lot of use. Players that use Rapid Conversion, Attack Conversion, and probably Pot of Greed will be able to likely use this one to help boost their damage. Haywire looks like it'll be a response card to Reversal, so the idea here is you see somebody use Reversal, you go ahead and use Haywire, and then it'll flip their HP and ninjutsu basically back to where it was before, with a little bit of a loss on top of what they had already lost when they used Reversal. You can see the duels making a comeback later on this season. So the way this works, basically you get 3 trap cards, and then your opponent that it gets used on also gets 3 trap cards. Those cards can only be used on each other, and you can use that as a way to time and impact the way that they're playing. So whether it's slowing them down using Seal or Disarm, or if it ends up being like Deadly Javelin or Bats or something to that effect, you can use that to deal damage to them. So they come at random, so you don't know what you're going to get until you have them. The three cards you get are the same 3 cards that they get, I believe. And then you can use that as part of your trap strategy. Red Lantern Trap is similar to Lantern Trap, but the main difference here is that one, this card is a single player use versus the other one being against all opponents. And if you end up breaking the lantern, instead of reducing the number of fish you have, it does direct damage to your HP. The Gold Shuriken card is probably one of the exceptions to using all of your fish at the first boss instead of at a different boss. I'd probably say don't want to go too much over 150, but this would get you your Shuriken box. When you use that box, the timing would be good for, say, before my Outtro or BTR go off screen during their ninjutsu. This is also probably a good card to bring along for the confined battlefield effect, and will probably be well supported in the boost passive. Hand of Fate is basically a gamble between getting Bounty and Blood Contract. I'd personally recommend, if you're banking on Blood Contract, only get this card if you see that it's forbidden before your match starts. Otherwise, I would just wait to encounter this when you're actually playing on the stage. Not really worth gambling on, in my opinion, before the match. So good to get if you find it, but not something that I would pick to spend your fish on directly. Income Forbidden is a card I expect to see a lot in use once it comes into play here, for its cheap cost at 150 fish, and the fact that it stops others from gaining fish and ninjutsu energy for a good period of time there. 13 seconds is a long time when you're traversing a map. I expect people will be using it, so you'll be seeing people use or want to bring Purify or some other card to defend against that. But I think this will be very useful when it becomes active. So a boss damage setup really focuses on just dealing damage and ignoring what's going on with your teammates, as well as ignoring what your opponents are doing. You're just focused on doing as much damage as you can right out of the gate. There might be some coordination that you do with your team beforehand so that they can support you in doing damage, but you're not really worried about providing that support back. So you're just focused on clearing the boss as quickly as possible. A couple of cards that you might be able to swap in for your passive: instead of Blade Master, you could potentially use King's Blessing if you're good at dodging, or Bloody Blade if you want to use a little bit more of the high risk, high reward approach. The team support setup really focuses on making sure that your team has what they need to get through the stage as well as through the boss fight. So in this case, you can see the setup is really focused on helping them deal damage. If you have a situation where, it's forbidden recovery, or that you're worried about them taking extra damage, you could swap in some other cards such as Lightning Shield All, Emergency Recovery, or Regeneration All. The debuff setup is really about just slowing down your opponent. So Disarm, Seal, whether you're talking about the individual cards or the all cards, those are good options to help kind of keep them from doing damage or reducing the amount of damage they do. Other cards you might want to consider are Weaken or Energy Dissipation. And then if you want, you could even swap these out for trap cards. So Lantern Trap, Lava Rain, Deadly Javelin, things like that can be useful for dealing damage to your opponents as well. Another passive that you could consider using as well is Card Blessing. I'm generally not a fan of it, but for this setup it is actually useful since it can give you a chance at getting additional debuff or trap cards. These are just a few examples of the ways that you might want to set things up. A lot of players kind of mix and match these approaches, but they generally tend to lean into one of these categories. There are some other ways of playing as well, but don't want to get too far into that. If you're interested in it, leave me a comment. That'll let me know to make another video kind of covering a little bit more around those strategies. Alright, and that is it. Thanks for taking the time to check this out. Let me know if it helped by giving it a like, and if you want more content like this, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. We'll catch you on the flip side.